Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's University Business Web Seminar, which is entitled How Enterprise Performance Management Can Help Institutions Adapt and Overcome in Challenging Times, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor, Oracle Education and Research. Before we get started, I would like to share just a few housekeeping items. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and type your message if you're having technical issues, and I should get back to you shortly. If you don't have computer speakers or if you prefer to listen privately, please dial the phone number and access code that I'll be posting in the chat window in a few minutes once the presentation gets underway. Also, something important to note, we will be welcoming any questions that anyone in the audience has today with a Q&A session that will take place at the end of the presentation. To submit a question, all you have to do is log into the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen, and then send your questions to all panelists, which is the default option. If for whatever reason you don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, please look to the right side of your screen again and click on the expand triangle, which is directly in front of the panel name to make sure you have access to it. Also, one last thing to note, if you would like to access the web seminar today at a later time, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who registered and who is also attending today will receive an email with a link to the slide as well as an archive recording. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to all of you our speakers today. We have Nicole Engelbert, who is the Vice President of Higher Education Cloud Product Management at Oracle, in addition to Mark Seawald, who serves at Oracle as Vice President of EPM Product Management. It's nice to have you guys with us today. We look forward to your insights. Nicole, you're ready to go.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here. Absolutely, we have a great topic and agenda, and I hope a really wonderful discussion we'll have today. Certainly everyone on this call is kind of feeling the challenges, experiencing the challenges, and some of the, I think, opportunities that institutions are really demonstrating, almost a heroic effort over these last 9 months. We're going to talk a bit about kind of what we see as kind of the road ahead, as well as kind of how EPM solutions can help kind of navigate these crises and disruption and even dislocation in the days, months, and perhaps even years kind of ahead. Before we're going to get into the agenda and into the meat of the presentation, I do want to note that you are protected by our safe harbor statement for this presentation. While the part of the presentation today that I'm presenting is kind of about general industry trends, Mark will be discussing Oracle's EPM solution and will indicate explicitly if there are areas kind of outside kind of current general availability of the product. Okay, so what are we talking about today? So first I'm going to start with kind of perhaps a different view or a contrary view, or perhaps, God forbid, a kind of a disruptive view on kind of where the industry is and what we should be expecting and preparing for in the next kind of 6, 12, 24, even 36 months ahead. And then from there, Mark will jump into kind of how our product, the Oracle EPM solution, can help institutions kind of navigate that uncertainty and bring clarity and purpose to the institution. And as Stephen said, we'll have time for Q&A. I know this is higher education, so I hope no one will kind of hold back from typing their question, no matter how big or kind of how small they might be. Okay, so kind of let's start with kind of a fairly grim kind of set of figures. And I think kind of at the end of the day, what we're looking at for higher education, and this is challenging, and we had kind of challenges once before in 2008 and certainly in decades prior, but we are certainly, once our health crisis kind of moves on, kind of perhaps kind of deep into 2021, we are looking at, for higher education, a period of prolonged recovery. It will take kind of quite some time and effort and even kind of bold, fearless leadership to get us past the kind of social and economic change, enrollment change that our industry has and is currently experiencing. Kind of everything from kind of a shift in the kind of need of our students financially in order to pay for college, and their ability to navigate financial aid policies that may have been constructed and contrived of in a very different time, to, as ACE estimates, $120 billion hole that's been punched into institutional budgets over the last 9 months, and a pretty radical shift in who is enrolling in our institutions, at the community college, at the Research One level, both in kind of who those students are economically and who those students are in terms of their home countries and where they are coming to. I mean, a year from now, higher education in all likelihood will look kind of quite different than it does today. Now, a year ago, I would, as an ex-industry analyst, and the graph on the left-hand side of the screen was from my time at Ovum, where I talked about kind of the disruption cycles that higher education faces. Historically, they've been measured in decades. They were quite almost predictable. There is a reason why our strategic plans are built in these kind of 3, 5, 7, 10-year cycles, because they're supposed to help us manage and navigate kind of predictable and cyclical disruption cycles in the higher education industry, which is considered an institutional industry, historically not dissimilar from kind of government or utilities or healthcare. Though some of these industries, you should be thinking, oh gosh, they've been experiencing far more disruption than kind of over decades. But a year ago, I would have presented and had presented many, many times the concept that our future disruption cycles would be kind of far more frequent and far more impactful. So instead of measured in decades, they might be measured in years or even semesters, and they would touch far larger areas of the institution kind of or the industry. But they would be cycles. And one of the characteristics of a cycle is kind of a return to a normal or return to a mean, that there was kind of a rest state kind of in the industry. And I think what we are now kind of seeing in stark kind of painful relief is that we are no longer kind of in a cycle, that we are in kind of almost a period of crisis, that we've moved from disruption perhaps to kind of something quite different. I mean, these statistics from EDUCAUSE or from last spring, they feel kind of a bit, almost feel nostalgic about one of the times when we were thinking about what would we do kind of this fall, and kind of all bets are off in terms of where we are or where we're going to be. I mean, it was the best laid plans of mice and men. And what I would suggest is that COVID-19 has pushed us outside of kind of a cycle of disruption, where change was in areas kind of the institution, areas of the industry, perhaps specific student groups or specific programs saw much larger change, even dislocation, but the disruption kind of remained kind of at the margins. COVID-19, however, threw rocket fuel kind of on all of this and moved the industry from disruption cycles to kind of a more wholesale dislocation of the industry, where kind of the economic and cultural position of higher education has been kind of destabilized. Now, what that does, what the difference and why it's so important to discern between kind of a disruption cycle in an industry and dislocation is because how you plan for it, if you can, is quite different. In disruption, change is a wave, where under dislocation, change is an avalanche, kind of one where we return to kind of a rest state to one where we realize an entirely new landscape. Under disruption, kind of processes, discrete processes will change, where under dislocation, the system which organizes all of our processes from recruitment to enrollment to advisement to development to kind of research, the system that organizes them kind of changes and makes us have to think differently about what the appropriateness or the relevancy is of those processes. Under disruption, technology is new ways, shiny toys, technology that, again, a specific process, it might change how we do elements of recruitment. But under dislocation, technology kind of changes kind of how we look at the value of the industry. So look at the difference between kind of having a mobile app versus something like Masterclass, the subscription program that has now kind of emerged. It's because, in many regards, the expectations of our customers have not just shifted. Our customers have become kind of new in who their persona is, and their expectations are not just kind of different, they're kind of fundamentally changed. And there isn't, in fact, going to be kind of a return to that idyllic, almost nostalgic view of where higher education was, to kind of how do we chart out this kind of new unknown normal that will happen kind of post the avalanche. Now, we've seen kind of set some of these possible kind of scenarios have been and will continue to be in a kind of a way, as someone who's been deeply committed to liberal arts education my entire life, the idea of closures and consolidation is heartbreaking, not least of which because it is kind of one of the most unique aspects of American higher education. But we are well down this road to a contracting of the industries, and we're seeing more and more kind of budgets, more and more institutions closing or consolidating or merging kind of across geographic areas and across systems. We are also seeing the emergence of new operating models. I must have kind of stopped dead in my tracks when I first heard about kind of the shifts to the academic term that happened this fall. If you know higher education, which I'm sure everyone on this call does, the idea of changing the academic calendar, which is absolutely sacrosanct, is unimaginable, but yet that is what in fact happened kind of on many campuses. And will it return? Does it make sense to return to campus after Thanksgiving? And certainly kind of the new rise of academic, what we might call networks. If you haven't read kind of about or seen kind of what the Big Ten was doing in terms of taking free courses, a single free course, but a free course nonetheless, kind of across a group of institutions, kind of imagine kind of what that model could be or might be a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. And of course, there has been much ink spilled kind of on this, obviously digital ink, not actual ink at this point, is kind of the shifting kind of enrollment patterns. Who will arrive on campus this fall, who will return kind of in the spring, and who will persist through the crisis and beyond? And will there be new entrants into the market? Will kind of old players kind of shift and evolve? Will we see more of the mega university? Regardless, we are experiencing kind of a period of kind of keeping the lights on as opposed to building that shining city on a hill, which is the mission of many institutions across the country. And finally, the other scenario that we are experiencing and likely to see is how do we kind of build a new kind of student experience. This is not about the concierge or the lazy river or kind of the wonderful residential life kind of building, but how do we keep kind of students safe? How do we keep them connected to the institution when they may or may not have ever set foot kind of on that campus? I mean, certainly we are going into a period where we have first-year students who may not have visited the campus, either as a prospect or as an enrolled student, and may not have developed the social networks or the academic networks that they would have under kind of the previous model. And will that kind of change retention and persistence and ultimately their engagement as alumni? And these are all things that we'll need to kind of explore and consider in the days and the weeks ahead. So ultimately, this all leads to kind of when the waters recede, what will be the landscape in higher education? And kind of under much more stable circumstances, we can kind of predict that or model that kind of much more easily. But in a dislocation scenario, we need far more powerful kind of tools, more available to a wider and more pervasive array of stakeholders, and delivered in a way that is far more accessible kind of to those individuals. I mean, because every individual from kind of the president to kind of an associate in the admissions office needs to have kind of access to those tools, granted in different ways and for different purposes, but how do we imagine that? So as we move towards that, what will the institution kind of demand? I mean, certainly there'll be a level of automation so that the accessibility to kind of predicting what will be left behind after the waters recede. We'll also see kind of the back office kind of centralization kind of across the industry and far more consumer market sensibilities for those students having a different experience, a different expectations of the institution. But I think the most important part, and I will kind of hand it over to Mark to really kind of go kind of deep into it, is that the tools that institutions need to move, they need to accelerate kind of far and away from, a few folks in the third office down the hall in the basement of Main Hall doing some data crunching to understand the strategic plan, but having strategic modeling, really powerful tools to help them understand kind of the next steps, to have the peek around the corner, to understand the cascading implications of the institution and how it not just thrives through this crisis, not just survives through this crisis, but ultimately thrives on the other side. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my good colleague, Mark Seawald, to actually get you into the good stuff and show you how.
Excellent, Nicole. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Mark Seawald. I'm in the product development team, specifically within product management here at Oracle, and responsible for some of the capability that we're talking about here today. I really love the way Nicole started the conversation here with this webcast, talking about the challenges. Obviously, there's no shortage of them, but also the opportunities. I think there's clearly a need for not just changing how institutions run, but also how finance runs within institutions. And this is something that is not unique to higher education. In my role here at Oracle, we work with many different industries, and we're seeing obviously massive changes across all kinds of industries, changing in their sales channels and how they interact with their customers when it's necessary to be remote. And because of that is driving massive change from the financial processes and technologies that are supporting it. So that's precisely what I'll get into here. I'll talk a little bit about where I think some of the opportunity is to help finance within higher education manage that transition, manage that change as an avalanche, as Nicole talked about. So with that, let me start out by introducing a little bit about the Oracle's EPM solution. And what we call it is it's a connected finance solution. It has a lot of broad capability. I think in the context of today's discussion, I'll focus a little bit of where we cover it. But it is really designed to be a capability for all the needs under the office of the CFO, whether it's things like your annual department budgets, your planning, your long-range scenario planning, and updating your forecasts. But it also addresses areas like account reconciliation. These are areas that typically can be very time-consuming. Business processes that need to be done as a part of your closing your books. For those organizations that might have both a healthcare system, or those institutions that might have both a healthcare system and a university, you might have the need for things like financial consolidation and helping close the books across multiple general ledgers. Capabilities included within EPM Cloud for that as well. One of the bigger areas that I think is interesting, and definitely something I'll drill into here as I get into the presentation, is we have capability within the product that helps with cost of education analysis. Particularly, this may be certainly relevant in these times when very difficult decisions need to be made around what parts of the institution will remain, what parts of the institution will maybe need to grow in the future. But if your institution's interested in responsibility center management or any of those type concepts, I think some of the capability that I'll talk about there will be good. But with that, let me get into a little bit of the capability specifics. And I'll talk a little about how planning in particular, I think a lot of folks, when you think about EPM solutions, you think about budgeting, or you think about the planning of the institution. And Nicole really did a very good job of describing how higher education will be changing, but that also necessitates a change to the way you do your planning. I love the slide that Nicole showed you, where there was kind of the ups and downs of the cycles that formerly happened over a period of years, now happening in a much quicker type time frame. And Nicole also alluded to historically institutions are doing their strategic plans in a cadence of maybe every 3 years or 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. These kind of things are really good examples of what need to change from a finance standpoint within higher education today. This slide is designed to describe some of those changes. I think certainly the concepts of periodicity, and what I mean by periodicity is the frequency or the buckets by which you do your plans and forecasts and budgets may need to change. As Nicole talks about things like changes to the academic year, some of the assumptions you used for budgeting or some of the assumptions you use for forecasts historically will obviously need to change. Drivers are a big part of how you build your budgets or build your forecasts. Those kind of the drivers that have been used historically, drivers of the institution, assumptions around growth rates, that may need to change significantly. The cost of education, I guarantee that'll be a big area of focus. You can't just assume those costs of education need to remain the same moving forward. Another area very likely to change. Assumptions around CapEx decisions. Do you need an accelerated process around CapEx decisions? More visibility into CapEx decisions, costs of PP&E, and so forth. I think very clearly, if not, I've already stated here is that the frequency of doing a strategic plan. I think a lot of institutions are probably spending, revisiting their strategic plan, as mentioned, every once in a while, every 3 years, 5 years, something of that nature. But that very likely needs to change. What we actually saw in the earliest parts of the pandemic was the need to go through scenario planning almost by the month. What's going to happen? Nobody knew where the pandemic was going to take us. Nobody knew where the impacts of the institution would be. So the need to be able to do these kind of strategic scenarios and do them quickly was very important. And I don't think that will necessarily change going forward. I think there's still obviously going to be a clear amount of uncertainty in exactly where the industry is going as a whole, where the institution is going to be going, where the focus of the institution will be in the future. And that's going to necessitate this much more frequent updating of your strategic plan and probably a little bit different structure of that strategic plan. Also, the last point on the screen talks a little bit about kind of the relationships to what I call bottoms-up planning to top-down planning. I'll define what I mean by that. Hopefully this resonates if you're a practitioner within finance. It may not be quite as relevant if you're not directly in finance, but things like the annual budget are very bottoms-up in nature. You're collecting information from all the different departments and colleges and schools around the institute, and you're aggregating that information up to come up with the consolidated budget. Strategy tends to be much more top-down in nature. We're going to say, hey, based on some high-level assumptions, what will we look like 2 years from now, 1 year from now, 3 years from now? So today, in most organizations, that process tends to be pretty broken. You have a strategic planning process that's not closely aligned with your annual budgeting process or your forecasting processes. So I think going forward, there's going to be a need to connect these kinds of processes, have a lot more synergy between kind of this bottoms-up and top-down type planning or forecasting. And that's precisely where I'll get to next year. So first part of the EPM Cloud, what I think is very relevant to folks, is something what we call our strategic scenario planning. If you're familiar with our product, some people refer to it as strategic modeling as well. And this is where a tool that's used for really that long-range strategic scenario planning, running through all the different assumptions of what will be happening within the institution, not just within the current semester or current year, but looking out over several years. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that this is part and parcel of the solution. You can see the example of the strategic plan here going out. In this case, you can see almost all the way up to 2023. Obviously, it can go out further than that. But it is part and parcel of the solution. It's not built in an Excel spreadsheet where many organizations do their strategic planning today. So that provides an opportunity to do things much more quickly and in a much more connected fashion. So, for example, as you receive new actuals in coming every month as you're closing the books and you're updating your forecasts, can the forecast directly feed into your strategic plan? So you can see now that you've got another semester under the belt or another month or two under the belt and the facts have changed, what will the strategic plan look like? That kind of integration is very hard to do if you're relying on an Excel-based process, and that's precisely what a tool like scenario planning here does within the EPM Cloud. So it is really good for that kind of what-if scenario planning on the fly, with the latest information. Importantly, it also has best practices built in. So when you look at where the institution needs to be within a couple of years or 3 years out, you're not just looking at the income statement. You need to be looking at the whole trial balance, the balance sheet, cash flow. Obviously, is going to be very important. Obviously, looking at all the different layers of revenue sources, auxiliary revenue, tuition, and whatnot. Looking at all those assumptions. All that kind of logic is built into the system, full income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow all tied together. So you can make assumptions around growth or reduction in tuition collections and certainly take a look at how that impacts the balance sheet, cash, and so forth going out over the course of the next number of years. Also, I think what's some nice capability in this particular solution is that it's a very modern approach on planning and forecasting. So there's capability in the product known as goal seek and simulations. Goal seeking is where you maybe have a target where you want to be 2 to 3 years with enrollment or with tuition or with a certain level of cash within the institution. And it allows you to flex your budget or flex that plan based on that goal you're looking to target at. So if you ever try to do that in Excel spreadsheets, you can certainly do some of this in Excel, but it's hard to do when you're looking at across the entire institution. The next capability is simulations. And simulations is what I would call more of an advanced type of style of planning, but it's excellent. It's a technology that allows you to de-risk your long-range plans. More specifically, it's referred to as Monte Carlo simulation. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to run through hundreds of different simulations of likely outcomes. So there's certainly no specifics that are going to be understood a year from now. So there could be any one of a range of outcomes. Simulations allow you to test all of the likely outcomes against what your strategic plan is. So it allows you to build up some assumptions and understand the risks related to those assumptions within the strategic plan. It's a wonderful capability, and as mentioned at the top of the webcast, if you want to see a demo of this capability, there's a demo available. There's a link here in this presentation, so when you get access to the presentation, you can click on that and see it. Definitely encourage you to take a look at it. I think another area that I think is going to help institutions arm themselves, or finance organizations within higher education, to better arm themselves with being more efficient and more accurate in plans and forecasts, is predictive technology. Predictive technology that helps you to build up where expenses are going, where revenue is likely going, not just based on subjective analysis or opinions, but taking a look at the historical results and seeing where those trends are leading the institution. Now, very clearly, predictive technology, obviously no machine, no algorithm out there certainly could predict something like COVID. But I think as you start to get more semesters under the belt, as you start to get more quarters closed in the business, you will start to see more trends in what's happening within higher education, and using this predictive technology helps you to really improve the accuracy, take out some of the bias in planning and forecasting, and really improve some of the efficiency of your budgeting or forecasting processes. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, I'll give you an example of that. So I guess up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a screenshot of the predictions. What you'll see there in blue and green is your historical data, and then everything to the right of that, the line there in that top picture, that orange cone, really represents the prediction of where something like enrollment might be going, or where some volume of expenses being driven might be going. And then down below, what that allows you to do is it allows you to compare your human-based forecast to a machine-based prediction. Now very clearly, as I mentioned, predictions aren't perfect. They won't be 100% accurate 100% of the time. But what they do help you to do is they help you to have a more objective discussion. So if you take a look at a manually or human-based forecast, and you can compare it to a machine-based prediction and identify major variances, it gives you an objective discussion point as you're reviewing budgets, as you're reviewing plans and forecasts. Hey, your forecast says this, the prediction says that. Maybe the human forecast is still more accurate, but the prediction is just based on the historical data. Why is there such a strong variance here? And again, maybe the forecast is still more accurate, but this gives a great way for, I think, institutions to be able to start to, make your planning and forecasting more efficient, and also start to have more objective discussions, removing a bias from forecasting. Another, I think, important, a very relevant area, again, there's going to be a lot of difficult decisions moving forward around what parts of what the programs, what departments, what degrees, what courses are the most appropriate moving forward. What's the full cost of education for your particular institution? I alluded to this in my intro. Maybe your institution is looking at things like a responsibility-centered management. If that's the case, one of the features here in the EPM Cloud is really very well suited to do this. You can either look at historical actuals and come up with very specific cost of education analysis, but you can also do this cost of education analysis on your forecasted data as well, or your budgeted data. So you can say, start to measure, are we staying on track with where we need to be from a cost of education standpoint? Effectively, what it does, and you can see here in the graphic, it allows you to take your assumptions around expenses and revenues and allocate your indirect costs out to the different parts of the institution. So taking things like facilities costs, taking things like your IT costs, your faculty costs, allocating it based out on criteria that are relevant to the consuming parts of the institution. Which programs or which departments, which schools are using the most of some of these shared services. What are the assumptions we have around revenue and auxiliary revenue, and the percentage of that auxiliary revenue that might be allocated out to a program or a department and so forth. So the ability to do this, it can give you a lot of insight, obviously, around making very important, difficult decisions, and also to make sure that you're keeping on track as you move forward to your transformation plan. Today, in most organizations, most institutions are using Excel spreadsheets. If you're doing this at all, if you're doing this in Excel spreadsheets, it can be very time consuming. And what we hear, it often can take weeks, if not months, to do this kind of analysis. And because of that, you very likely are not doing it very frequently. This is a tool that can be set up with rules. It can be maintained by finance, so you can point and click to build up your assumptions around these different areas of expense and revenue. And it can be updated just on the latest actuals. So within minutes or hours after closing the books, you can get the latest analysis around that cost of education. Hugely important. I think clearly, as Nicole pointed out, there's going to be a lot of difficult decisions, and having the right kind of facts available will help you make the best decisions around moving forward. Another area that in the last area that I'll focus on here is the time spent and what we'll call the last mile of finance. So once you're done closing the books, or once you're done updating your forecast, or once you're done with your annual budget process, there's a fair amount of time spent creating budget books or preparing internal management reports and so forth. So that area today tends to be very manual. A lot of spreadsheets, a lot of PowerPoint documents being shared back and forth. It tends to be an area that you're also relying on a lot of email, a lot of kind of questions around version control. Is this the final version? Is this final? Is this final? Things of that nature. Did somebody get CC'd on some very sensitive information in this email that maybe shouldn't have had access to this? So there's a lot of challenges around the development of these budget books and management reporting, because a lot of people need to contribute to them. And obviously, it's a very inefficient process. Within the EPM cloud, there's some really nice capability we call narrative reporting. And narrative reporting is a tool that dramatically improves this process. In fact, what we hear from institutions like yourselves that are adopting this technology, they're seeing upward between 40 to 70% reduction in budget book cycle time compared to manual processing. And generally, what institutions see is that in the first year of use, maybe you have a 30 or 40% type improvement, reduced amount of time spending preparing these things. But year after year, semester after semester of using this technology, you actually continue to get benefits as you automate more and more process. What it is it's capability that allows all the people contributing, whether it's within finance or out in the different schools and departments, department heads and whatnot, everyone preparing the information that goes into budget books and management reports can collaborate online. So instead of emailing each other back and forth different versions and not knowing if you're working with the latest version, everything's online through the tool. And it does version control and tracking of who's making updates where. So there's very strong governance around this process. And then it also automatically pulls the data directly from the source financial systems. So instead of keying numbers into your charts or graphs, or instead of typing up narratives that need to reconcile back to your charts and graphs, all those numbers can be automated. So as you're updating a budget to the final cycle and some of the numbers have changed, you can refresh that budget book just by the click of a button. So really, I think why I think this is relevant. Obviously, is there's going to be a lot of strategic internal management reports prepared. And obviously, budget books will have a lot of scrutiny going forward. I think this is a process where I think there's a great opportunity for efficiency within finance. So these are themes I think that are going to be very, very important. I think finance organizations are going to continue to be asked to do more with less. So anything that can help improve efficiency moving forward, I think within finance can be a good thing. So hopefully, that gives you a little bit of a tour of some of the capability. It's certainly not an exhaustive tour. I really didn't get into talking a little bit more about some of the financial close capability, like account reconciliation. Didn't talk about things like consolidation or metadata alignment. But hopefully it gives you a little bit of insight into where we believe some of the opportunity is to help you manage this transformation. So as the industry evolves, as your institution evolves, finance needs to evolve with it. Importantly, I will say that if you haven't looked at cloud solutions, or if you haven't looked at them recently, I really encourage you to look at it. You need to change kind of the frame of reference of how you think about your budgeting technology or your finance systems. Maybe your institutions implemented this kind of technology years ago, I can tell you that this technology has changed dramatically here over the last several years, and I think is a big part of helping institutions manage this transformation. So with that, I really appreciate your attention here, and I'm sure hopefully there's some good questions lined up. I'll pass it off to my colleagues for the Q&A session.
Hey, thank you very much, Mark, and also you as well, Nicole, for your insights, definitely. So as Mark was saying, we now have some time for the Q&A portion of our presentation here, where both Mark and Nicole will be here to answer any of the questions that you may have. For those of you who have not yet submitted a question, you can please do so now by submitting it in the Q&A panel, which should be located below the chat panel at the bottom of your screen. And it looks like we do have a few questions here already. This first one, it looks like it'll be directed more so towards Mark, I believe. So they were asking, what is a typical implementation timeline for Oracle EPM? So how long will it take this institution to go from, signing a contract to actually using the tool?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Thank you for whoever asked that. I think I tried to allude to that a little bit there towards the end. I think for institutions that have implemented finance systems in the past, you probably measured things almost in years. And I think that's really one of the big areas that's changed a lot here in the cloud. Cloud is an enabling technology that not only just enables you as an institution to be more effective within finance, it actually allows us to be more efficient here from a product development standpoint. So the technology is much more modular in nature and really much more rapidly implemented. So where your implementation of a budgeting system may have been, a year in the past, for many institutions, you can be you're measuring it in weeks or months on the outside. And importantly, it depends, obviously, kind of question around implementations always depends on the scope of the implementation. Why I mentioned that it's modular is important. So let's, for example, say that maybe you're only interested in the capability there around cost of education. You don't have to implement all of this together. Maybe phase 1 is cost of education. Maybe phase 2 is that strategic modeling. Maybe phase 3 is turning this on for budgeting. So you don't need to think about, oh man, replacing our budgeting process is going to be a huge undertaking. You can really think about, what is that capability that's going to be the most important for us here in the short term, and you can lay out a roadmap as well. So think about it. Number one, that's going to be much faster to implement, but number two, that you can think about this much more modular in nature and phasing in the capability.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. This next question that came in, also it's for you, Mark, most likely. So this audience member was asking, will Oracle EPM work with their on-premise systems?
Yeah, another great system. This is here at Oracle. We've had our cloud products for many years now. So, and that is an absolute fact of life that institutions like yours are not all of your financial and operational systems will be on-premise or in the cloud. Some will still be on-premise. So it's been fundamental to us day one here at Oracle to always being able to enable that hybrid type environment. So we would fully expect our cloud-based finance solutions like the EPM to interact directly with your on-premise. Maybe it's an on-premise general ledger or ERP system, PeopleSoft and whatnot, or maybe it's on-premise operational systems. Those kind of systems can easily be interfaced directly to the cloud. And we have a number of different options. For those of you who may be more technical on the phone here, we have varying degrees of integration capability directly within the product that allows you to transform data as it comes into the cloud. We have on-premise agents that actually allow you to do real-time queries against on-premise systems and whatnot. So there's a full range of enabling capability to make sure that it interacts with your on-premise systems in a very seamless fashion.
Perfect. Thank you. So we do have another question that just came in. So they're asking, how would a board of trustees member be aware of the benefits from the university using an EPM system. So this audience member, they're saying that they are siloed, but with manual interventions and legwork. The board sees what looks like an integrated picture.
Don't know if that's a question to myself or Nicole here, but I'll at least take the first stab at it. And Nicole, I certainly welcome you to add on it. But yeah, I think that is, what's being described there around having different stakeholders being disconnected is precisely what this solution is trying to address. As far as educating somebody around capability like this, that's precisely what these kind of webcasts are all about. But these kind of solutions are designed to be used across the entire institution to bring people together and have them working from the same set of numbers, same set of metadata, and so forth.
So what I would add, Mark, to this, and it's a sad example, but what I think it's spot on. I remember a few years back speaking with our previous CEO, Mark Hurd, who sat on the board of trustees at Baylor University, and his comment was it was so hard for him to get data about how the institution was doing, and it was so hard to get data in a way that was sufficiently timely that they could take action kind of on it. And so while I think it's important for trustees to know the major technology initiatives that an institution is undertaking, I think the power is really kind of the proof is in the pudding, so that those trustees now have access to data far faster, far more timely, far more kind of granular when it needs to be, but high level when it needs to be. And that's what tools like Oracle EPM can bring to the table, kind of giving the trustees the insights that they need when they need them in order to shepherd the direction of the institution more effectively.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, both of you. And it looks like those were all the questions that we did receive. It looks like we had a quiet bunch here today, but that's fine. That said, again, thank you, both of you, Mark and Nicole, for your insights. We do appreciate your time here today, sharing your expertise, and our audience appreciates it as well. And that said, I would like to thank our attendees for joining us today. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by University Business, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, in addition to trends and current issues in higher education. Our wide range of readers at University Business subscribe for free to our magazine and stay up to date with us through the print magazine itself, the digital edition, in addition to our newsletters, including UB Daily, which is our daily newsletter, and UB Tech, which features the most relevant ed tech stories in higher ed, in addition to web seminars like this one. Also, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again with Oracle, or for those of you who believe that the solutions that were provided here by Mark and Nicole in this web seminar will be helpful to your colleagues, you will be pleased to note that an archive recording will be available at the URL provided, which you can see on your screen here. You can also expect to receive an email from our team at UB at some point tomorrow, which will include a link to all of the slides as well. And with that, on behalf of University Business, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone, for coming here today, and have a great rest of your school year. Take care, be well, and stay safe, everyone.